Say that. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the course, The Buddhist Path of Awakening. As we work our way through the profound treasury of the ocean of Dharma, these are 3 volumes: the Hinayana, first section of the Buddhist teachings; Mahayana, the middle section; and the Vajrayana, the advanced and final section. And we are on the middle section, the Mahayana, volume 2, the Bodhisattva Path of Wisdom and Compassion. These chapters are editings and compilations, digests of talks given by Chogyam Rinpoche over the course of about 15 years at seminary. It was a program that took place every fall, except for a few years that were missed in there, when Rinpoche took anywhere from 150 to 250 students off for 3 months of study and practice. And he gave talks during the study sessions in the evenings. These talks were digested into these 3 volumes, and we are working our way through them. Tonight we are discussing chapter 28, on the second Paramita, second transcendent virtue, discipline, and Michael will begin.
Okay, so welcome everyone, and want to thank everyone and John for the opportunity to speak about the discipline Paramita, because teaching forces me to read the chapter many times, and in so doing, I come to appreciate things that I might miss on the first or second reading. Anyway, Trungpa Rinpoche begins by saying that the Paramita of discipline is described as a perfume infusing good discipline all over, and as being free of passion. It is connected with Vipassana. And I think that the analogy of being like perfume, or in other texts, sometimes it's considered to be like incense, is again the sense of pervading the environment in an invisible way, but in a positive way as well. In any case, discipline is called Shila in Sanskrit, or Sultram in Tibetan, which translates as proper conduct or the proper way to behave. He goes on to say that the difference between the Hinayana and Mahayana approach is that with the Mahayana, you're working much more for others. And what this means is that one of the key things that we're doing in the Mahayana is cultivating and training in bodhicitta. And we're doing this for the benefit of all sentient beings. So there's a really good definition of bodhicitta, both relative and ultimate bodhicitta, in the very beginning, the very first talk on page 5. But the basic idea is that with relative bodhicitta, we relate to the world with kindness and benevolence. And with ultimate bodhicitta, we fully develop and relate to the world in terms of spaciousness, compassion, and knowledge. Or in other words, in Sanskrit, shunyata, or emptiness, or spaciousness; prajna, knowledge or wisdom; and karuna, which is compassion. So ultimately, that's where discipline is taking us. That's where the Paramita of discipline is taking us. He goes on to say that at the Hinayana level, individual liberation is emphasized, that first we have to save ourselves. And he gives us an analogy, the instruction on an airplane, that if the cabin becomes depressurized, you should put a mask on yourself first before you put a mask on a child or someone else who might need assistance. So what we're getting here is that all of the discipline that we work with in the Hinayana, in the foundational vehicle, still applies. We're still looking at the necessity of taming the mind, cutting discursive thoughts, short-circuiting the kleshas, cutting karma, developing renunciation, and developing insight and awareness. That all of this, all of the, everything that goes into the individual liberation in the Hinayana, the foundational vehicle, continues in the Mahayana, but it's much more extended and much more expanded. and that our intention, our aspiration is not just liberation for ourselves, but actually to be able to liberate all sentient beings. So ultimately, that's what he means when he says the difference between Hinayana and Mahayana is that you're working much more for others. He goes on to say that even if you have a good practice of dana or generosity, if you don't practice Shila or discipline paramita as well, it's as if you have no eyes and cannot see. So this takes us back to the very first sentence, that it's connected with Vipassana. That he goes on to say that generosity is like gathering seeds, but the paramita of discipline is like plowing the field in order to sow the seeds. Without the cultivation, no fruit or good harvest can come about. He says that discipline in the ordinary sense has a quality of tightening up. You either go along with a certain way to behave or you do not. But in this case, discipline is slightly different than conventional morality. So it's important here to understand what he's telling us in terms of understanding discipline, because I think for many of us, it has negative connotations connected with notions of punishment and being bad. And that's not quite what we're talking about here. In the Buddhist tradition, discipline is said to be like possessing a pair of eyes. So again, we're talking about Vipassana awareness, bringing awareness to situations in our life. If he goes on to say, if you do not have the eyes of Sultram, if you do not have the eyes that come from the practice of discipline paramita, you don't see things, you don't see dharmas properly. He says, if you're exceedingly speedy or absent-minded, you do not see clearly, and gives the example of driving in an absent-minded or speedy way and ending up in an accident. So discipline, again, involves Vipassana awareness and being attentive to, being aware of what we're doing. He says, much of the confusion we experience in our lives is due to being unable to see dharmas properly. And here, dharmas are all phenomena. It's in that sense of dharma, one of the many definitions of the word dharma. So Sultram does not mean simply obeying the rules of the party or the church. In other words, again, as he said before, it's different than conventional morality. Sultram is intelligent discipline. So again, the sense of intelligence connected with awareness, connected with Vipassana is very much part of discipline paramita. He goes on to talk about maintaining simplicity. And he says that Shila paramita is regarded as a way of making yourself available to the practice or discipline of whatever you're doing. So we're continuing to talk about the sense of Vipassana awareness, of being aware of what we're doing, being attentive to our experience. Again, Shila paramita is regarded as a way of making yourself available to the practice or discipline of whatever you're doing, rather than punishing yourself because you've been a bad boy or a bad girl or trying to correct yourself. So again, we're moving away from a more narrow sense of discipline or a more punishment-based and a sense of basic badness view of discipline. So, and when he's talking about making yourself available, what he's talking about is simply being mindful, being present, being attentive to what we're doing. And he says this kind of discipline is much more pleasurable and much more rewarding, although he does add to that in the long run, which he gets to in a few minutes. But you should enjoy discipline, he says. You can enjoy making a good cup of tea with no mishaps without spilling, which is what happens when we make ourselves available to the practice or whatever it is that we're doing, so that we can actually slow down and appreciate rather than being speedy or absent-minded, as he said before, or just getting into a mode where we're just trying to get things off our list and not really attending very well to what we're doing. He says discipline is very much a question of properness, which he defines not as stuffiness. So again, we're working at understanding his use of words in some very specific ways, which he defines not as stuffiness, but in this case, being proper means being in accordance with the laws of nature. You are simply being where you are with things as they are. And this is exactly what we work with in meditation practice, is learning to be present and be with ourselves, be with our experience, be with the world around us, just as it is. Again, when we become speedy or absent-minded, too caught up in ego projects, then we do have mishaps, we have accidents, we have spills, and all the things that he's talking about. He says the analogy for discipline is that of the wish-fulfilling jewel. because it's the basis of all kinds of virtues. And this is going to come up over and over in what he presents, that discipline is the wish-fulfilling jewel because it's the basis or ground for developing all kinds of virtues. So discipline is seen as a general sense of richness rather than as a tightening up. So again, we're back to what he was saying before, that it's not a conventional sense of tightening up, correcting oneself. And he's going to say more about the sense of richness as well in just a little bit. So then he says a little bit then about the path of working with discipline. And this goes back to it being more pleasurable and rewarding in the long run, because he says in the beginning, however, discipline is not always very pleasant. It can be embarrassing, awkward, and tight. He says you begin by gritting your teeth, but once you get used to it and begin to give in, you make your home in it. You find comfort in the discomfort. Eventually, he says, you may find a little bit of the elixir of life between your teeth, which gives you strength. And at that point, discipline is no longer effort-oriented. It becomes effortless. And then he gives the example of living in a cave and talks about the great Milarepa, who spent years in solitary retreat in caves in Tibet under all kinds of harsh conditions. And his point is that, yes, it's difficult at first, but then you begin to settle down and it begins to feel good and natural. Nothing is all that comfortable and ideal at the beginning. And with this, I was thinking, I've not ever meditated in a cave, but I've done solitary retreats. And almost always the first day or so is really difficult. And at a certain point, I actually kind of think it's funny because especially when I was working and there was just a torrent of stress in my life, I would really look forward to retreat. But then as soon as I'd start the first day, there'd be this sense of anxiety and loneliness, and I'd have to give in and get into it. And then it is delightful, it is pleasant, but sometimes in the beginning, it's not. So he's just letting us know that we do have to work a little bit at these things, at least in the beginning. He goes on to say, as we've talked about already, because it mentions in the beginning that it's based on Vipassana, that discipline is based on awareness, which brings appreciation and a proper relationship with the phenomenal world. Proper conduct, he says, is to maintain what you have, to stick with the bare minimum. So here we're talking about simply being contented with our experience in the present moment. Actually, the bare minimum is the title of one of the chapters on meditation in the previous book that we read, The Path of Individual Liberation. But basically, we're just learning to rest in simplicity. He says its nature is simplicity. And he says the link between generosity and discipline is that having given up your usual flashy, exhibitionistic and colorful attachments, you end up with the bare minimum and you stick with that. Discipline means constantly continuing with simplicity. Just the simplicity of being in the present moment and being able to rest in our present experience. An important point of discipline, he says, is that you're not looking for signs of improvement, which create further agitation and ego involvement in terms of trying to gain something. Discipline is said to be the counterweight for happiness and the terminator of suffering, meaning that we don't get carried away with happiness or suffering. And this relates to the whole notion of equanimity, which we talked about and we read about the four immeasurables, where he said that basically equanimity means equalizing so that we don't get caught in extremes. And that's exactly what he says. He says discipline keeps you from both extremes with a big hammer. Having stripped off attachments, you end up as a simple, straightforward, naked child without companions with a real appreciation of loneliness. So then the next section, which is titled Stepping Beyond Preoccupation and Busyness, really begins again with some description of discipline that could relate more to Hinayana discipline. But again, with the Mahayana, we're engaging in practice for the benefit of all sentient beings. It's not purely for our benefit. So even there, we're developing an extended or an expanded sense of practice. But in any case, what he says about preoccupation is without discipline, your preoccupations become much more intense. You're much more involved, more frustrated, and busy with the complexities of your own neuroses. He says you could recreate realms and manifest them in all sorts of ways. Without discipline, it's difficult to free yourself from such preoccupations. So here we're talking about being able to tame the mind and reduce our identification and attachment to the kleshas. It reminds me of the chapter on discipline in the Way of the Bodhisattva by Shantideva. He begins by saying that the wandering mind, the untamed mind, can bring us more harm than anything else, because it can literally bring us into states of hell, the hungry ghost realm, and so on. And I think that's essentially what we're being told here. Again, it's the importance of discipline, learning to tame the mind, even in the Hinayana sense. When you're busy and preoccupied, you feel hassled by your existence. You torture and torment yourself. You think you even think you don't have time to spare for your practice. As you begin to work on that, you realize that the inconvenience, discomfort, and anguish you experience is no more than what anybody else experiences. So your experience is no longer regarded as monumental. However, it's still a problematic situation. Therefore, you need to practice the paramita of discipline, which overcomes that type of preoccupation altogether. So this, again, is what we work on with the path of individual liberation. This is where we put the airplane mask on ourselves first. You begin to realize that preoccupations are garbage. They're worth flushing out so that something real could come up. Then paramita activity begins to make sense, and you can act in a more genuine way. He goes on to say that basically, we're trying to put a stop to frivolity of any kind. And he goes on to define frivolity as indulgence, or frivolity as anything that creates further confusion or the longing for further confusion. And that with discipline, you control any form of potential escape from reality. He goes on to say, and this again all relates to taming the mind. This is all very similar to things that we read in the path of individual liberation, that the paramita of discipline undermines the attempts to make small things big and allows big things to be made quite small. So if you remember the talks in the path of individual liberation, where he talks about how all kinds of things come out of just single flickering thoughts, like pilot lights on a gas stove. But this is what we're talking about here, is taming the mind, being able to cut thoughts, cut the kleshas, cut karma, so that we don't have this minute to expansion. He says our habitual tendency is to exaggerate small things into large things so that small neuroses grow into larger neuroses. But with discipline, you begin to see that whenever neurosis arises, it can be regarded as workable. And we do this in meditation when we're able to recognize that we're distracted, let go, and simply come back. And we do this again and again. We cut this tendency to elaborate on thoughts, which lead to actions, which leads to karma. The idea is to overcome the busybodiness of excuses, no matter what comes up, and to concentrate on your discipline. The reason we practice is to train ourselves fully and properly, so that eventually we'll be in a position to exchange ourselves for others' misery and pain as best we can. So at that point, we have, to continue with his airplane mask analogy, we put the mask on, and then we are able to relate effectively with others. We are able to exchange self for other, which is what the practice of Tonglen is all about. And because we have some stability and equanimity in our experience, we're able to relate more skillfully and with less ego with others. By engaging in unnecessary preoccupations, we become enslaved to ourselves. And by overcoming such unnecessary preoccupations, we begin to liberate ourselves. The paramita of discipline is said to be the ground of all the virtues taught by the Buddha, the ground of life. Without discipline, we do not have any basis for practice at all. And he goes on to talk about freedom. Freedom means that you're free from being belabored and enslaved by your own mind, free from preoccupations. Being free from unnecessary preoccupations is the basis of all virtues, or again, the wish-fulfilling jewel, as he said before, and means constructively organizing your life as creatively as possible. So creativity is regarded as a virtue. You're not destroying and you're working toward healthiness. Creativity comes, again, from awareness and from being free of habitual patterns, being free of ego fixations and holding on to things in some kind of a fixed way. Virtue means healthiness and wholesomeness. You do not give in to paranoia of any kind, particularly paranoia as to your own survival. In other words, we're less focused on ego, less focused on our well-being, less paranoid about our well-being. So that begins to cut down on the possibilities of passion, aggression, ignorance, jealousy, arrogance, and all the rest. You begin to attain jnana, or wisdom, which is the essence of practice and the source of the attainment of enlightenment. So at this point, discipline is quite a cheerful situation, but sometimes we might find that it's not so cheerful because we don't have the chance to play games with ourselves or plead for sympathy from our friends, he says. Being disciplined is how to remain a happy, healthy person. It doesn't mean you grind your teeth and work yourself to death or meditate yourself to death or find at the end of eons that you're a dried up little meditator. I like that. Instead, you discover that you're a reasonable person able to exchange self for others. And again, at the point where we're able to really exchange self for other, again, to go back to the airplane mask analogy or the importance of individual liberation, of the Hinayana path as the foundation for Mahayana, we're actually able to do something for the benefit of other beings. And he says, finally, you can relax. Then the last section that I'll be talking about is titled Basic Goodness and Self-Control. So basically, he says here that Shila Paramita, or Sultram, is geared to the notion that you have something to offer. Once you begin to control your lack of discipline, you discover basic goodness. So here we're moving very clearly from Hinayana discipline to Mahayana. First, you practice and refine your practice, then you find goodness. And I think if you refer back to the chapters on Buddha nature that we read earlier, Enlightened Genes, and I think Basic Goodness was the other title. This is really an important aspect of Mahayana practice, is coming to recognize and appreciate and have confidence in our basic goodness or our Buddha nature, or bodhicitta, whatever we want to call it. When you do the Tonglen practice of exchanging yourself for others, you can begin by thinking of basic goodness. You have lots of good things to breathe out, he says, healthiness and sanity. And all that comes from the basic awakened and enlightened attitude, which is alive and strong. What you give out is no longer purely imagination or something that you have to crank up. You have something good to give out. In turn, you breathe in what is painful and negative. The suffering that other people are experiencing can be brought in because, in contrast to their pain, we have basic healthiness and wakefulness, which can certainly absorb anything that comes to it, he says. You can absorb suffering because you have a lot more goodness to give. And he goes on to say that seems to be the basic point of Paramita practice altogether, to build up that sense that you have something to offer. So I think this is a really important point. That seems to be the basic point of Paramita practice altogether, to build up that sense that you have something to offer. You have something absolutely good and wonderful to give out to others. The only question, he says, is do you know that you have it? And this is, again, why meditation practice is so important. Although we're capable of recognizing awareness in any situation, in meditation practice, it becomes easier to recognize. And as we become increasingly able to recognize, we become more familiar with it. That's one of the words for meditation, in fact, is gom, which means becoming familiar. And as we become increasingly familiar, we develop confidence in our basic goodness, our Buddha nature, our fundamental awareness. And this eventually leads to some kind of realization or stabilization of this experience. In any case, he goes on to say, in this discussion of the Mahayana, and this is important. We have not talked about anything that you do not already have or that you need to crank up. We've been discussing qualities that you have. We just need to realize that we have them. We do have to dispel problems, he says, but beyond dispelling problems, we don't have to crank up anything. We don't need to create anything artificially or manufacture anything. He goes on to say that it brings it back down to earth too, but the notion of sultram includes such things as good table manners and basic decency in the everyday, ordinary, and simple sense. Discipline is a question of learning to behave and to appreciate yourself. In terms of discipline, some behavior patterns make more sense than others. And it's just one of those odd coincidences that sometimes happen. I looked at my iPhone news feed, and there was an article today about table manners that people get wrong and why they actually matter. And you can look it up. It's a Huffington Post article. But basically what it says is the most important purpose of etiquette is really to make the people we're with feel comfortable and at ease. And it goes on to talk about certain notions of etiquette that really are based on just simply doing that, helping people be at ease, as well as some practical purposes as well. That, for instance, holding a knife and fork in the proper way means that we don't slip and spill food or scatter food all over the place, which goes back to what he was saying before about being able to make a proper cup of tea without spilling and without mishap when we're present and available to our experience. Anyway, he goes on to say that when you become a generous person and develop your dignity and wealth, if you don't have control over your existence, generosity goes down the drain. Control means that the way you relate with your sense perceptions and the world of pleasures has to be modified. So again, we're back to what he was saying before about frivolity and indulgence and anything that creates confusion. And he gives the example of either overeating or over offering pastries, so that either we become sick or dysregulated in some way or somebody else does. So that again, part of discipline is learning to control our desire. And that in fact, at this point, discipline becomes necessary as a way so that we don't become overwhelmed or confused in our practice of generosity. He goes on to say the discipline of controlling the sense perceptions is the basis of all virtues. And then he says that the basis of discipline is the behavior pattern or psychological state of not thinking of yourself as the star of the world. You do not come first. A non-centralized existence brings proper conduct. So this is another aspect of discipline that we talked about before, not putting ourselves first, but actually considering other beings, considering the welfare of others. And that this also is part of Mahayana discipline, that we don't have to come first. And then finally, he says that discipline is said to be the basis of all virtues because of the evenness of temper, the evenness of existence, and the trustworthiness of experience it produces. He says, and again, this relates to not making ourselves the star of the world or putting ourselves first always. He says, you do not organize your life purely according to your moods. Your senses are controlled and you create predictability for yourself and others. So here again, we're talking about the notion of equanimity or equalizing, so that with discipline, we don't give into extremes. We don't allow our moods to control us. We don't allow our moods to do anything that might be harmful to oneself or to others. And with that, I will stop, and John will continue with discussion of discipline. There's quite a bit in this chapter.
Thank you, Michael, and I agree. It's a lot in this chapter. I think that what he's saying is that the essence of discipline, what Michael said in the very beginning, that we sort of have two different modalities. The modality of being lost and absorbed in our thoughts and our passions, our anxieties, our neuroses, our worries, our resentments, all of these things. The other modality that we're being taught in the course of this practice is to come present. We experience this in our meditation practice when we sit. We experience it in our daily lives when we come back from neurotic thought into awareness in the present moment. It's described in various ways as shamatha meditation, as vipassana, and as shunyata, sort of different levels of more and more coming back into awareness in this present moment. And this awareness is a very different modality from being caught up and acting out of thoughts and passions. In this awareness, we are open. Our awareness is clear. We're not acting on thoughts, schemes, paranoias, habits. Instead, we're right here, open in this awareness. And this is the real meaning of discipline, is to come back to this awareness. Because in this awareness lie all the virtues of intelligence, the virtues of open-heartedness and compassion and resonance. I mean, when we're lost in our thoughts and our neuroses, we can't really resonate with other people because we're too concerned with me, me and my problems, me and my hopes, me and my fears. But when we come back into awareness in the present moment, out of the dreams, then we have the opportunity to actually be here and to appreciate our surroundings and the people who inhabit those surroundings. And we become much more open-hearted, kind, resonant, affectionate, generous, cheerful, humorous even, in a genuine way without being a jokester. And so really the discipline is to begin to shift our loyalty, as he says, and I love that phrase. I'm sorry, I repeat it over and over again, from samsara to nirvana. Not really nirvana in the sense of some kind of blissed out state, but awareness, awakening, being here. And this makes us available for other people. So we are kind to ourselves, that's the Hinayana virtue, because we're giving up all of these unhappy, neurotic thoughts that are all about struggle and worry. And that makes us available to others, which is the Mahayana virtue, because now we're here instead of being lost in dreams, self-absorbed dreams at that. And now we can actually come present and be with the people in our lives in a way that is open-hearted, cheerful, and compassionate, and intelligent. And that awareness, he said, as Michael pointed out, this is the beginning of the development of jnana. Jnana is usually translated as wisdom. It's yeshe in Tibetan, which means primordial knowing. And really what it is this open awareness that is here all the time. It's in the space that we inhabit. It's already here. It's not something, it's not a faculty we have to employ, exercise. It's something that we come back to. It's our intention. There were some such amazing things in this last section that Michael did, and he pointed them out. He said, I was thinking when he was talking about the fact that you are learning to behave properly and to appreciate yourself. He says you are learning to appreciate the way your hair is arranged, the way your clothes are tailored, the way your shoes are shined, the way you eat your food, the way you hold your knife and fork, the way you say hello, the way you shake hands, the way you look at somebody. Because when we come present, we begin to appreciate the beauty of these gestures, of these things. And he taught this. He took a bunch of ragtag hippies and got them to start wearing suits. He got a bunch of people who were making their living selling hash pipes made out of deer antler and clothes that looked like Indian clothing made out of leather, and turned them into business people selling real estate and gemstones around the United States and every other darn thing. And then he established the court. The court was where he lived. That's what he was called. It was the Shambhala court. And there, people ate with manners. They were taught manners as best they could, and wore beautiful clothes. And we all got dressed up in suits and ties and went to the court for events. And there was a ball every year in Boulder that we had. It was celebratory. When he was alive, we all went and did the waltz, and people got waltzing lessons. And the men had to wear at least a dark suit and hopefully a tuxedo, and the women wore appropriate gowns. I mean, it was all about celebrating, coming into this present moment and adopting the mannerisms, the gestures, the behaviors that communicate respect and appreciation for life. I was thinking as Michael spoke, early on, my parents came to Boulder, and my father and mother and my brother and I, and the woman that I eventually married, Christy, and others, took Rinpoche and Diana out to dinner at a restaurant here in Boulder. It was up Boulder Canyon. It was called the Red Hill Inn. And after dinner, we went back, and my parents went to their hotel or motel, wherever they were staying. And Rinpoche said to me, "Did you see how your father was looking around the table, making sure that everyone was comfortable and happy?" And I said, "No, I hadn't noticed." And he said, "Yes, he was. You could do that." And it was true. I hadn't been doing that kind of thing, but my dad always did that. He was always surveying the environment to make sure that everybody was comfortable and happy. And Rinpoche really loved that. He admired that because what it demonstrates is a lack of self-absorption and an awareness of the environment. And that's what discipline is really talking about, an awareness and appreciation for this world that we inhabit. And you can call it shamatha, which means coming back from dream into one-pointed awareness of the present. You can call it vipassana, which is having come back from dream into this awareness of the present. Then we have very wide awareness. And you can call it shunyata, which is the ultimate fruition of that kind of awareness. And shunyata, as Michael pointed out, contains prajna, appreciation of this space that we inhabit. And prajna is the intelligent appreciation of it, and compassion, friendship, and even more. So really, this is what discipline is about. It's about shifting our loyalty from self-absorbed thought, which is always neurotic and unhappy, into awareness in this present moment in which we become available and for others in ways that are open-hearted and perhaps cheerful. So in this next section, intentions and actions, he talks about the ground path and fruition of this discipline. And the ground is your commitment to practice. There it is. Commitment to coming back into awareness. The path is actually practicing, coming back into awareness. And the fruition is that you continue with your practice until it is fulfilled properly and completely, which basically means he takes it all the way to enlightenment in someday. But in the interim, it means being much more aware and available for the people around you in a very kind and intelligent way. He says, the Hinayana practice is mainly about ceasing to cause problems for yourself. That's, as I said, you're thinking, and oh God, I've got this problem, I've got that problem. What am I going to do about so-and-so? And I'm worried about this. You stop that, and it's about, and then he says it's about your intention and how you realize that intention. And the intention is to come present and be present for others. And then in the Mahayana, you reach the phase in which the slightest intention of breaking a precept destroys the purpose of your life and of living as a human being. But you could be without such an intention. And if an intention arises, you're like, I'm going to get even with that person, or I'm going to get rich, or I'm going to be unhappy and get drunk, or whatever it is. If that intention arises, you could label it thinking and come back to the present moment. So there are three types of discipline. The first is called binding yourself, dompe tsultram. Dom means binding, tsultram is the discipline, and pe is a possessive, it's like apostrophe S. So it's the discipline of binding. And what it means is that you're responding to the needs of others that you're here awake and aware in the present moment, and you're giving up frivolity. Frivolity means, in this context, it could mean, go, ha, 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 that's frivolity. But what it really means is silliness, stupidness, being involved in, your dreams, repetitive. These dreams makes you unavailable to the intelligence of this present moment and of the needs of others. That's the frivolity. And it's unnecessary. That's why it's frivolous as well. It's totally unnecessary. It's self-indulgent. And so it's frivolous. It's frivolous because it is not in tune with what is real. Then it's not frivolous if it's in tune with what is real. And so what this means is that you're binding yourself to the real and giving up frivolity. He says, you're not indulging in the neurotic aspect of the sense pleasures. And it means cutting off the nervousness of mind, cutting discursive thoughts and unnecessary preoccupations. There it is. That's what we're doing. And when we cut those, where are we? We're here, present. So again, we're shifting our allegiance from these neurotic preoccupation thoughts into this awareness in the present moment in which everything beautiful arises, in which a person can survey a dinner table and be concerned about, is each person getting what they need? Out of a genuineness, a genuine concern. He says the basic point is taming the mind. Traditionally discipline is connected with being a monk or a nun. And then you observe all these rules of discipline. Well, he instituted a lot of rules. It was the behavior at the court. I remember there's a teaching that we're going to do at some point. We're going to go through the Shambhala teachings. And there is a wonderful teaching about yun. Yun is a quality that certain objects have. And it makes them glow with value. It's actually a substance that you can find in the earth. Sometimes it's green, but it manifests in beautiful clothing and beautiful objects. I would say over my shoulder, there's that's a Buddha's top knot. It's called an ushnisha, and it's gold. And I think that has some yun, that object over there. And there are things on the shrine that oftentimes you put things on the shrine that have yun. Rinpoche used to take his students on yun expeditions. For instance, he would take men or women shopping for clothes that had yun. And everybody would be trying to find something that had yun, like a tie that had yun. I'm not wearing any yun right now. I should have a pin. Pins often have yun. And when you have yun, you wear a pin, it's a power thing. It attracts people's attention. And that attraction is a manipulation. It's a kind of a power, exercise of power in a very gentle and kind way. So he used to teach this kind of thing. This is what happens when you begin to come present. You begin to see these things and how they operate and become much more intelligent, in tune, aware. He said, we used to look at ties, and he would talk about ties that had yun and ties that didn't. We were all wearing ties in those days. Let's see. So you're giving up the nervousness of mind, cutting discursive thoughts and unnecessary preoccupations, and you are bound by authentic, genuine commitment to the real, to this, which has heart. It has love. We could have a great affection for each other and for this environment. He says, with Dompe Sultram, that's the binding yourself, to this, you're not a nuisance to yourself nor to others, because you're not lost in some neurotic scheme or dream. And you're fulfilling the aspirations of the Bodhisattva vow you took. You're becoming a decent person. That's what it means to be a Bodhisattva. The real essence of being a Bodhisattva is this coming present into emptiness, into reality, into clarity. And then he says, responding to and fulfilling the needs of others, giving up ego-centeredness and relating more to Maitri, that's kindness for yourself, and Karuna, kindness for others. And then beyond that, into Mahakaruna, great Karuna, which means the freedom of emptiness, the freedom of this present moment, freedom from what? From neurotic thoughts and dreams. Genuineness, that's part of Mahakaruna. And giving up any attempt to manipulate and avoid things. That's Mahakaruna, great compassion. And it brings stillness to the mind. Both excitement and laziness are controlled, because when you come present, you're giving that up. You're coming into stillness of the mind. He says it's possible to be even at all times, and this produces the social graces. You are bound by basic good behavior throughout your life. The social graces. I remember at the first Shambhala assembly, we would go off for 10 days at a time. He had his mother-in-law give a talk to the men on manners, only the men, right? And so she went into a hall and she was very nervous. And I was a good friend of hers, so I escorted her. And she had Parkinson's. And when she got nervous, she really trembled a lot. And I remember her arm trembling as I took her, and she was holding my arm as we walked in. And there were all these men, maybe 100 men. And what we didn't know was that Rinpoche's wife and his sister-in-law, Diana and Tessa, were hidden behind a screen, and they tape recorded the whole thing. And somewhere I've got that tape. And she gave a talk to the men on manners and etiquette. And the heart what I remember most about what she said was that the real essence of manners and etiquette is kindness, gentleness, respect for the person that you're being mannered to. It was really lovely. And then men stood up. Oh my God, the questions in the Q&A. It was another time. They were really something. So this whole thing, this emphasis on the manners and the etiquette, because when you come present, there are ways to express your compassion, your intelligence, your appreciation for the beauty of this present moment, for the beauty and tenderness of the relationships you have with the people around you. And that's really what the manners are about. He says it is possible to be constantly even all the time, to be bound by good behavior throughout your life. You're free from laziness and free from too much excitement, frivolity, and emotionalism, because your mind settles down. He says at first it could be a strain, because you're constantly sort of watching yourself to come back. You feel like you're trying to act like a zombie at first. I'm going to, pick up this fork and I'm going to eat this in this particular way, and I'm going to have my tie and all this stuff, and you feel like you're sort of watching yourself trying to go through these motions. But as you go further, you see that your basic goodness is showing through the whole thing. Your good aspects are being cultivated and your wicked aspects are being subjugated. You become a decent person 24 hours a day. This is really the path that we're on. This is what Sultram, Shila, discipline means. And then I put this in red in my notes. Through Dombait Sultram, that means binding yourself to this. You have bound your frivolity, which is usually allowed so much room. Your frivolity is your silly lack of attention to what is actually happening and being involved in dreams. The second virtue and the second aspect of Shila, the three types of discipline, gathering virtuous dharmas. And he says it's developing oneself. It's becoming tamed, dharmic, 24 hours a day, thoroughly soaked in Dharma, thoroughly soaked in Vipassana, awareness, shunyata, mindfulness, softness, all of that. It's commitment to becoming thoroughly soaked in it, becoming a dharmic person. He said it is the discipline of ripening and developing oneself again and again by coming present. An emphasis on intellectual study, hearing, contemplating, and meditating, which also produces that it makes you realize the value of your teacher, appreciating what the teacher has said. And I think about it all the time, those teachings. And as Michael said, when we go through these chapters, we learn so much. We're going over what he said. I really appreciate it. Connecting with mindfulness, you become a very tamed person, as well as a heroic Bodhisattva-like person. This is your gathering virtuous Dharma, or Dharmas. You recognize the value of the teachings and the teacher 24 hours a day. If only. You stop being lost in dreams and getting off into that. He says, and the world's functioning become messages of the Dharma, wherever and whenever you are. Everything in your life is seen as an expression of the Dharma. This requires enormous discipline. And what it means is enormous awareness, coming back. That's the discipline. And then you begin to see everything as an expression of the teachings. You're becoming a dharmic person. You become thoroughly soaked in the Dharma, in passionlessness and egolessness, soaked in gentleness and reasonability. It's because we are giving up again and again the neurotic thought patterns and coming back into appreciation of the beauty of this present moment, which melts our hearts. And we can see the differences between a dharmic and a non-dharmic person. A dharmic person speaks with awareness, mindfulness, softness, and doesn't have these hidden agendas going on in their mind, habitual patterns going on. Whereas a non-dharmic person, he says, shouts or jumps up and down and is always nervous. It just means a non-dharmic person is lost in acting out the dreams of one's mind. Non-responsive, relatively, to what's around them. And it's obvious in the way people walk and conduct themselves and talk to others. And I think of him and how he could just be sitting there doing absolutely nothing until someone walked into the room. And then he would come to life in the sense of being responsive to that person, so interested in the other person, having a conversation with the other person. And then finally, the third aspect of discipline is benefiting sentient beings. Semten tunche. Semchen means possessing a mind, and it also means possessing a neurotic mind. Sem is a word for mind that carries with it the meaning of neurosis, an unenlightened mind. And Chen is to possess. And Tunche means passing on benefits. Tun is benefit. Che means doing it, he says. So Semchen, sentient beings, as is translated. And this, as you study the teachings, especially as you go to the Vajrayana, you'll hear this term over and over again, sentient beings. It's the English translation for Semchen. And it refers to unenlightened people, people who are suffering. Those who have a mind, he says, an neurotic mind, and you're fulfilling their purpose, benefiting them. It also means making others worthy, preparing them for the Dharma. And it includes bodhisattva actions of all kinds. But the main ability to create bodhisattva actions, these transcendent virtues, lies in you. The first, you have to ground, is to come present. Vipassana, shunyata, out of the dreams. And that is the discipline. And without that, nothing can happen. Benefiting sentient beings means you're willing to spend time helping others, and it just comes naturally. When you begin to come present, you feel an affection for others. You want to be responsive to others. This isn't like some kind of goody two-shoes kind of performance, like you're going to be a really good person. It comes completely naturally out of affection, out of liking, out of response. And then he says, discipline is not moralistic. You are not trying to be a good person. You work for others, not trying to be good, but automatically, because of your interest in your open-heartedness. You're propagating the message of gentleness, which seems to be the core of the Buddhist approach altogether. When you come present, gentleness is there. He says with this Semchen Tunche, benefiting others, you are able to cut through their neurosis and create harmony by means of your good presence. When you get around a person who is sane, it automatically can, if you're aware of it, calm you down, bring you out of your own neurotic patterns. And Kagyu style is you stop people from neurotic actions first. You don't discuss through your lawyer, he says. You just stop them. People in samsara do harmful things, so you need to take positive action. There's no room to philosophize, and it is an immediate situation, like the emergency room of a hospital. People can really do nasty stuff when they're lost in neurotic dreams. He says, from the Bodhisattva's point of view, the whole world is an emergency room. You have to keep people from harming themselves. You have to do the job yourself. The responsibility is on you. You have to be willing to use the corrective mechanism of telling the truth. Telling the truth means being true, being here, being able to speak out of that instead of out of dream. From the minute you wake up, you're always working for others in every situation. And boy, did I see it in him. From the moment his eyes opened to the moment they closed at night, all he was ever doing was communicating this open-heartedness, open-mindedness, attentiveness to the people around him. And it was a wonderful example, but it's something that we could all aspire to. So then the conclusion of this chapter, he says, through the practice of the three principles of Shila, Paramita, of the Paramita of discipline, you're able to let go of your ego. That's really what it comes down to. By coming present, by giving up those neurotic, habitual patterns. That's what it means. We're giving up ego, because ego lives in those neurotic patterns. I want, I fear, I hope, I resent, I dream, whatever it is, I. And by coming present, that stops. It evaporates. Maybe not permanently at first, because we've got such habits, but we keep coming back. It's like the water dripping on the stone. And eventually it wears it away. You are going beyond your preconceptions, your neurotic habits and guilt, like going to a foreign country. Isn't that interesting? It's like we're giving up this so familiar, our thought patterns, our neurotic dreams, our worries, our resentments, our hopes, our fantasies of pleasure. They're so familiar and repetitive. And when we give them up and come clear, more and more, it is like going to a foreign country that you've never been to before. It's a little strange at first. Yeah, he says, you're learning how to be in your own spot in the world, at home, and then you can act. And this is through the first 5 paramitas up to prajna. With the paramita of discipline, you are repressing your neurotic habits. This is what I've been saying. And here he is. He's saying it in the end. But it works with each successive yana. As you go through the Hinayana, the Mahayana, and the Vajrayana, you repress your neurosis more and more, your neurotic patterns. He says, by comparison to what happens in the Vajrayana, the repression of neurosis in the Mahayana is very small. And he says, you could take delight in working with others. And you need, at the same time, you need to control yourself, your speed. We have this neurotic speed. We get lost in our neurotic forward motion, our worries, our anxiety, that where it's like we're on a treadmill with our feet moving under us with that kind of neurotic anxiety. And we need to learn to control that. He called that neurotic speed. In the Mahayana, what you are developing is heart or compassion. And what you're trying to get rid of is conducting your life in an ego-centered, unmethodical way. It's unmethodical because it's constantly jumping around in our thoughts, our habitual patterns that seem to arise randomly. He says that may get a little messy. The more aware you are, the more outstanding the obstacles seem to be. But he assures us there is success at the end. He says, and this is almost at the end, you are controlling yourself because whatever you do affects you, and not only you alone, but everybody else as well. So in the Mahayana, you have greater responsibility, and that is good news, he says. Good news. So we can have a discussion.
Well, John, this is Tully, and just to break the ice. I loved what Trungpa's mother-in-law said about the real essence of manners being kindness. It's a way of showing respect for others, being kind towards them, and she really nailed it. So thanks for that.
She did. I've got to find that talk. It's buried in a storage locker in Mount Kisco on a cassette tape.
Oh.
Her daughters were hiding behind a screen because it was supposed to be only men, and they taped it. It was really funny. She was so nervous. And the things that the men said, oh my God. One guy said, he goes, what do you do when you're coming down the stairs with your wife and you can see the woman that you've been having an affair with standing at the bottom waiting for you? He says that to her. And worse, there were worse things that came out of those men's mouths. And she handled it all with utter aplomb.
She must have been something herself.
Yeah, she grew up in Bloemfontein, South Africa, which is a very poor farming district in South Africa. And then she became an opera singer, and she wound up being a star in London until Second World War, and her husband went off to war and was a tank captain and came home with a head injury, and she gave up her career to nurse him. And after the war, he died. Yeah, but she was presented at court to the Queen, and she was quite lovely. Yeah.
What a story. Well, thanks for sharing that, John.
I remember going through a reception line, maybe 70, 80 people. Rinpoche wanted people to meet his mother-in-law. And I was with my wife and daughter, who was a baby, an infant. And we were introduced, John and Christy and Kara. About 3 months later, maybe, I ran into her again somewhere at some event. And I went up to her to say hello. Christy and Kara weren't there, my daughter. And as I bent down to shake her hand, she looked up at me and she said, "Oh, hello, John. How are Christy and Kara?"
Wow.
Wow is right. I was just blown away. It's a skill.
That sure is. Wonderful skill.
Yeah, she was a terrific person. Okay. Sorry, stories. Judith.
Um, I was struck by his saying you have to give yourself permission to know that you can do it. I'm paraphrasing. Am I paraphrasing correctly, Michael? He was, as far as being good, I suppose. He was, there was something about saying, giving yourself permission to know that you can do it. And then the question was giving yourself permission to know that you can do it. Is that
I don't
correct?
remember. I don't remember that quite. I'm not saying it isn't there. I'm just saying I don't remember. The part that I think you're referring to is when he was talking about, I think it goes all together with the importance of recognizing our basic goodness or our Buddha nature and coming to appreciate that and have confidence in it. And that, and that's what he says, that's the question, you know, do we recognize that? Do we know that?
Yeah.
And if we're able to, right, that's the basis for making the switch of allegiance, or you could call it a change of what we identify with, or whatever you want to call it. That's the basis for it, is being able to recognize, you know, that in ourselves.
Yeah. And
Have confidence in
keep
that.
thinking that that I don't do that. And then it occurred to me that in this caregivers group for caregivers of cancer patients,
Mhm.
people who are related to cancer patients who meet as a group through Gilda's Club, I'm the Buddhist there.
Uh-huh.
And it surprises me how open people are and how much they get out of my sharing about how I'm thinking about some of these ideas, such as last week, I discussed with them how I try to keep noticing how I wish everything were other than what it is. And how when we're caring for these people, that's what we're doing and causing ourselves a lot of suffering. And wow, did they glom onto it. It was astonishing to see them all scribbling, like taking it down, and seeing how much of the suffering that they have taking care of these essentially dying people who are going through these horrendous treatments,
Mhm.
how much it helped them to have that point of view presented to them and as a possibility for them.
Mhm.
So it really made me kind of taken aback that I was able to give that to them and that they were interested in it and finding it helpful. So that was kind of a wake-up call to me along those lines.
These teachings are very powerful and true. And, you know, when we're able to share it with somebody, it can be quite powerful for other people too.
Yeah, I was,
It's a great story. Thank you for sharing it,
It
because I
is.
think it really exemplifies exactly what generosity is about, and to some extent what discipline is about as well.
mm,
And I think this path is very much about beginning to appreciate that we, each one of us, are good people and able to help others and be appreciated for it and liked, because we have such a tendency to be so hard on ourselves and to feel unliked and unseen by others. And really, this path is about discovering that we can be helpful to others and be appreciated for it with an open-hearted friendship that goes both ways. And that is a huge, huge discovery. It has warmth, it has joy in it of self-appreciation, because the tendency in samsara is we don't appreciate ourselves. We're very hard on ourselves.
Right.
We think, I'm a bad person. You know, I'm not a good person. I did this and I do that and I feel this and all those things are bad. And actually, what this path is about, I put this in my notes. He seemed to be was saying, is discovering the goodness that other people can appreciate in us. It's not just us, that we are can be appreciated by others. And there's a huge joy and happiness in that. And that is part of the Shila, definitely.
Yeah. I think the part that I read was where he says this seems to be the basic point of Paramita practice altogether, to build up that sense that you have something to offer. You have something absolutely good and wonderful to give out to others. The only question is, do you know that you have it?
Yeah, that was the thing that
Yeah.
Well, you had it.
that
And you have it.
Yes, you have it.
And
You had it then, you have it
you
now.
can give it more. Lots more.
I think I have an audience there at the caregivers group who appreciates it.
Terrific.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, and thank Trumpa.
Yeah, thank you for being of help to others.
Yeah.
We are so hard on ourselves. Feel we are unappreciated or have little to give. And it's so untrue. And really, these teachings are about reversing that. Anybody else?
I was just
Mark.
thinking, I was just thinking that when we contract and kind of turn inward and delve into thoughts or the dream world, it's almost like we're inverting basic goodness, where we feel like we're short, so we have to take it from the environment almost, rather than knowing that we have this basic goodness and these qualities to share with the environment. It's almost, I don't know, you have the sense that it's just the way of your neuroses are so preoccupied with getting needs met that you feel like you don't deserve to be met, right? And so it's a very, I guess, frantic, nervous, worrying kind of feeling to it. And then, so being present and being open and knowing that you have these qualities to share, binding sounds accurate. It connects you to what's around you. And I just appreciate the teaching and how this has kind of shaped my perception of the concept. So thanks.
Yeah, and you're a caregiver. Yeah, that's wonderful. Jane.
A part of seeing the goodness in yourself is also seeing the goodness in others and bringing it out in others, especially when it's hard to find. And I think that it's very often affects someone else's self-image. That if you think they have good in them, then that they must have it somewhere as well. So I think that's part of this whole connecting with others, the empathy, the compassion, and finding the good in all of us.
Thank you. Yeah, that's wonderful.
Philip and Don.
Okay,
both.
Don. Yeah. Sorry, Philip.
I'm wondering if this is, it seems kind of resonant, but maybe I'm wrong with the idea of renunciation. Is that true? Are they closely related? Like renunciation, I think about giving up territory and somehow grasping according to one's ego agenda. I don't know. Am I on the right track? Are these two somehow related or resonate with each other?
Michael?
Well, certainly on there's renunciation in the Hinayana in terms of, letting go of the things that bind us to samsara. But I think that if, the notion of renunciation in Mahayana, maybe if we think about what he says about the word, you're no longer the star of the world, you don't put yourself first. There's an element of renunciation in that. But basically, it doesn't come out of a sense of rejecting something or putting yourself down. It's more a sense of expanded awareness. So it's not, in a negative sense of rejecting something, but more greater awareness of the world around us. But you could look at it as a kind of renunciation, I guess.
And I would say if there's anything to be renounced, it's self-doubt, self-attack. Yeah.
Yeah, that's really helpful. That's helpful.
Philip, you had something.
Yeah, thank you all. So there's so much commonality here, and all of our ideas are coming to the same thing. At the beginning of this chapter, I love this chapter. It's like all of the Mahayana is here in chapter 28. Judy Leaf always has this preface, and for this chapter, it's this: the basis of discipline is not thinking of yourself as the star of the world. So Michael just said that, others have said that. I wanted to come back to John, what you're saying is so important. We're so critical of ourselves, but what is also important is we are so critical of others. That's what our immediate response is. We come across anything that's new and we decide, passion, aggression, ignorance. Are we going to bring this thing to us? Are we going to drive it away? Are we just going to ignore it? I love this chapter because it's like cutting the ball and chain. It's just so liberating. It's just so freeing. This one page on 218, the first line of each of these paragraphs are just so absolutely wonderful, and they all have to do with getting out of our own ego mind, stopping this idea that we are the center of the universe. What an absurd idea, right? The universe doesn't care about Philip. It's just, and yet that idea is there, that everything, it's like, it makes me think of Copernicus and also my 10-year-old son, who came home and said he was really, truly sad because Sally wasn't his best friend. And how do I tell him that, in this entire universe, that just doesn't matter? What he's thinking is, nobody cares about me. This is so horrible. But in fact, he didn't care about Sally yesterday. He won't care about Sally tomorrow. Sally's not caring about Sally today. Nobody is. It's like we need to get out of this egocentric point of view. So going down page 218, every one of these paragraphs is about that, talking about frivolity, talking about undermining attempts to make small things big. I mean, that's what we do, right? That's what our ego does. It's just a tiny thing. We make it this big problem because it makes us important, or to make big things small because they are so small, they just don't matter at all. It's like lunacy. I'm going to skip over what I want to end on. For these other two paragraphs, we become enslaved to ourselves. Freedom means that you're free from being belabored and enslaved. What I want to come back to, and what we haven't spoken about here, and what is like the central practice of the Mahayana path, is Tonglen. And so on 218 and also on 219, Rinpoche hits on that twice. It says, the reason we practice discipline is to train ourselves fully and properly so that eventually we will be in a position to exchange ourselves for others. And on the very next page, you discover that you are a reasonable person able to exchange yourself for others. That's what it all comes down to. If we can, ideally, all the time, be present, not just with the person in front of us, but inhabit that person, to be in their shoes so profoundly that we're no longer feeling our pain, we're feeling their pain. And more than that, understanding that it's the same pain, that not is that person simply like us, that person is us. It's like, where are we going with this whole thing? We're going to this essential human commonality. That's what this chapter is all about. So thanks. I wanted to try to link all those ideas together because that's what I hear all of you saying. And it's so profoundly true.
Thank you, Philip. Yeah.
We're almost out of time.
Yeah. So, anybody, I don't see any hands up or. Well, we have discussion group tomorrow and we can continue it. It's a beautiful chapter, isn't it? It's just so full of
Terrific.
so heart and kindness and love of life. So we'll continue tomorrow in discussion, and we can close now with the dedication of merit. Always appropriate. I'll put it up and I'll mute everybody, and Shinyi, you can lead us. Hold on a second. Just kind of mute everyone. Oops.
We'll close by dedicating the merit for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may defeat the enemy wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the victim's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thank you, everybody. Really lovely.
Thank you, everyone.
Michael, thanks, John.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
thanks for
Everyone.
coming, everybody.
Good night.
Thank
Thank you
you.
all. Stay
Thank
safe.
you.
Shinyi,
Everybody.
Sarah. Everyone.
Bye.
Nice to see you, Soham. Oops. She left. Yeah.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Michael.
Oh, thank you.
It was terrific.
Very enjoyable chapter to read. And I was glad I had no choice but to read it several times.
Me too. I had to really work on it. It was Beautiful though. It's just, yeah. And it really affected people beautifully, I thought.
So,
You think so, Karen Sue?
Not wanting to leave.
I understand, but I must go.
So,
Good night.
See you
Bye.
tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye. Thank
Good night.
you. Bye.
Bye.